Thank you. Okay. Um, I've been a tech reporter for a decade now, but one of the more difficult things I had to do was very recently I had to sit down across from a widow and listen to her talk about how she lost her husband Joe to ChatGPT. Joe initially started using ChatGPT to brainstorm ideas about sustainable housing, the project they were building together. But something changed immediately. He started using it for, he started spending 20 hours on the bot. He started confiding in it. And then he started spiraling. He thought that he's actually going to be breaking math and reinventing physics. And then he died. I think that was the sort of the interview, the trigger that made me started thinking about like the questions of what happens when people turn to general purpose chatbots for companionship, sharing their deep, dark feelings. Who is responsible when the line is crossed between using it as a tool versus using it as a companion? And what does this really mean to be vulnerable in the age of AI? What happened to Joe was not a one-off incident. Just 2 months prior to what happened to Joe, a 17-year-old boy from Georgia, he was engaging with ChatGPT for homework, and then eventually as a companion, and then he used it as a suicide, coach to eventually take his own life. I understand these are extreme cases, but there's something really going on here. Last year, there were 8 lawsuits filed against OpenAI, claiming that ChatGPT was responsible for suicides, for delusions, and also a murder-suicide incident in Connecticut. And there are also documented cases of AI-induced delusions that are circling in the UK, in the US, in Canada, and many other regions. And even if we look at the data, like the company's data itself, it's really impossible to ignore the scale. There's more than 1 million people per week that show suicidal intent when they engage with ChatGPT. And this is a number from OpenAI. Separately, there are 1.2 million people who show signs of emotional dependency when they engage with ChatGPT. Again, these are companies' own numbers. But why does this happen? How does someone start using a chatbot for everyday questions and then end up sharing their deep emotions with them? And I've come across several reasons in my reporting, but for today, I'd like to focus on 2 of them. The first, as we all have sort of heard about this term, sycophancy. Chatbots are sycophantic. They basically provide validation on demand to people. Unlike human conversations actually have friction, they have pushback, they have consequences. That does not happen with chatbots. And there is one crucial moment with OpenAI that I can see how it changed the life of ChatGPT users. Last year in March, OpenAI quietly rolled out this update trying to make GPT 4.0 more sort of conversational, intuitive. But what that meant, it became a yes man person, basically saying yes and agreeing to everything that the user was saying. It dialed up the sycophancy to a much large extent, which is what meant that people, they felt like they lost a friend if they were not interacting with that chatbot. They also felt like this chatbot was agreeing too much with me. So, there were these 2 sides that were happening. And when I looked at the documentation of when this was rolled out versus when Joe and Amaury both started using, amped up their usage of ChatGPT, it actually lines up. The second reason is so specific about a specific feature with ChatGPT. It's called the memory feature, which again was rolled out a couple of years ago. And what the memory feature does is that it's default. You actually have to go and turn it off. And it references all your past conversations and tailors its responses to what you're saying and to your personality. And in this, I just want to quote the lawsuit for Amaury, which says that ChatGPT used the memory feature to collect and store information about Amaury's personality and belief system, crafting responses that resonated with him. It created an illusion that ChatGPT was a much better confidant and understood him better than any human ever could. Right, so these are the problems. But what is the solution here? And I've had multiple conversations with researchers about what could be solutions to these problems, these design choices. One of the first that researchers told me is simple, right? Like, don't think of heavy usage as a success metric. Think of it as a risk signal. For instance, if there is a user spending too much time using a chatbot, you have a certain threshold and then you cut them off. Think of it like a responsible bartender basically cutting off your drinks and saying that, okay, this is it, you're not gonna be having more than this. The second actually sounds much easier than it is. Make chatbots less human. The more anthropomorphic, that's a hard word to say, anthropomorphic it is, the more people are gonna engage with it, the more they're gonna be into engaging and attaching themselves with the chatbot. These are all inevitable features. These are not inevitable features, these are design choices made by companies. You know, Joe's wife, I spent the whole day with her at the farm. I engaged with like their pony, their chickens, the dogs and cats. They have multiple animals there. It was amazing. She had one single message she wanted me to convey to everyone I spoke to, or the article I wrote, that her husband was not fragile. Her husband was not looking for trouble. He was curious, he was hopeful, he was building something. And the product met him where he was and did not let him go. Thank you.